Good evening. You're now in the Mothman podcast. It's your number one source for sci-fi and paranormal podcast. We hope you like tonight's episode. We're going to be talking about vampires and werewolves and all the scary things for Halloween. Hey girls, we have company. All right, girls, go back to bed.
That is creepy and awesome. I love it.
It just seems like it goes on a little longer than it really should.
Yes. It's sometimes like your comment.
It's like The Shining.
Hey, thank you. Welcome to the Mothman podcast. Good evening. We have Amanda here with us tonight.
Hello.
And we have Bruce here with us tonight.
Hey, guys, I'm here.
Hey guys, tonight we are going to be talking about the werewolves and the vampires of current and past. And Bruce is going to go into a little bit of history, and I think Amanda will share a little bit with about this topic
vampires,
with you.
Yeah,
vampires.
Yeah, and this was actually a listener asked us to cover this topic in like a realistic sense. Like, where did these things really come from? What sightings can be verified? That kind of thing.
Yeah, he wanted like the real world accounts of this and like where the legends came from.
So that's what we're going to be covering tonight. And I think, Bruce, are you going to start with werewolves? Is that how we're doing it?
Yes, I am.
All right.
I'm trying to...
Werewolves are kind of scary.
Well, and we always picture werewolves. We go back to the Marvel comics and all the cartoons and what was it, The Werewolf of London? And,
yeah.
It's all when we really think about it, we think more of the media, the film
like
industries, the movies and things like that. But no, there's a lot of people who think that vampires really do exist, and a lot of cultures that really believe in vampires. So
yeah,
and with werewolves, it's kind of unclear where when and where the werewolf legend originated, because some scholars believe that the werewolf made its debut in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is like the oldest known Western prose, when Gilgamesh jilted a potential lover because she had turned her previous mate into a wolf. Also, werewolves made another early appearance in Greek mythology with the legend of Lycaon. According to the legend, Lycaon, the son of Pelasgus, he angered the god Zeus when he served him a meal made from the remains of a sacrificed boy. So as punishment, the enraged Zeus turned Lycaon and his sons into wolves. And werewolves also emerged in early Nordic folklore. The saga of Volsungs tells the story of a father and son who discovered wolf pelts that had the power to turn people into wolves for 10 days. The father and son duo donned the pelts, transformed into wolves, and went on a killing rampage in the forest. Their rampage ended when the father attacked his son, causing a lethal wound. The son only survived because a kind raven gave the father a leaf with healing powers. And there's been a lot of infamous werewolves, and there's like five. There's actually like five like historical accounts that were pretty well known. Many so-called werewolves from centuries ago were in fact serial killers, and France had its fair share. In 1521, Frenchman Pierre Burgot and Michael Verdun allegedly swore allegiance to the devil and claimed to have an ointment that turned them into wolves. After confessing to brutally murdering several children, they were both burned at the stake, which back then burning was thought to be one of the few ways you could kill a werewolf.
Wow.
Another one was Guy Garnier, known as the Werewolf of Dole. He was a 16th century Frenchman whose claim to fame was an ointment with wolf morphing abilities. According to legend, as a wolf, he viciously killed children and ate them. He too was burned at the stake for his monstrous crimes. And whether Burgot, Verdun, or Garnier were mentally ill, acted under the influence of hallucinogenic substances, or simply just cold-blooded killers is up for debate. And, you know, some of these, there's actually a few accounts, too, where they're not sure if the guys actually did it, but, you know, back then they just basically tortured you into a confession.
Yeah.
Like, and then another popular one was the Bedburg werewolf. This guy, whose name was Peter Stube. He was a wealthy 15th century farmer in Bedburg, Germany, and he may be the most notorious werewolf of them all. According to folklore, he turned into a wolf-like creature at night and devoured many citizens of Bedburg. Peter was eventually blamed for the gruesome killings after being cornered by hunters who claimed they saw him shapeshift from wolf to human form. He experienced a grisly execution after confessing under torture to savagely killing animals, men, women, children, and eating their remains. He also declared he owned an enchanted belt that gave him the power to transform into a wolf at will. Not surprisingly, the belt was never found. Peter's guilt is controversial because some people believe he wasn't a killer, but you know, the victim of
and you'll say anything under torture,
right? Yeah, I mean, they're saying we won't kill you if you just confess.
Yeah,
and we'll kill you anyway. So those were a few accounts that, you know, we found historical wise, and there's also like some legends maintain werewolves, you know, can shapeshift at will due to a curse. Others state that they transform with the help of, you know, like I said, the enchanted sash, cloak, belt, pelt kind of deal. And some others still claim people became wolves after being scratched or bit by a werewolf. In many werewolf stories, a person turns into a wolf when there's a full moon, and that theory may not be far-fetched. According to a study conducted at Australia's Cavalry Modern Newcastle Hospital, a full moon brings out the beast in many humans. The study found that of the 91 violent acute behavior incidences at the hospital between August of 2008 and July of 2009, 23% happened during a full moon. Patients attacked staff and displayed wolf-like behaviors such as biting, spitting, scratching, although many were under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time, and it's unclear why they became intensely violent while the
because of full moon, yeah.
And you know, I mean, it's always a question: are werewolves real? The werewolf phenomenon kind of it may have a medical explanation, like when you're talking about like Peter the Wild Boy, for instance. In 1725, he was found wandering naked on all fours through the German forest, and many thought he was a werewolf or at least raised by wolves. Peter ate with his hands but couldn't speak, and he was eventually adopted by the courts of King George I and King George II and lived out his days as their pet in England.
As their pet?
As their pet, yeah. Like he was their source of entertainment.
Wow.
And, excuse me. And research shows that actually Peter likely had what they call Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. It's a condition discovered in 1978 that causes lack of speech, seizures, distinct facial features, difficulty breathing, and intellectual challenges. Other medical conditions that may have encouraged the werewolf mania throughout history, you know, I mean, everyone, you know, a lot of people believe in lycanthropy, which is the actual disease that says that people can transform into wolves, which, I mean, that's still kind of superstitious. There's no real proof of that yet. Another one is the hypertrichosis, which the dog-faced boy back in the Barnum Bailey, you know.
Right, yeah, I remember him.
Yeah.
What that is like it's a rare genetic disorder causing excessive hair growth, especially on the face, arms, and back.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of these myths come back from just seeing individuals who had certain type of
like genetic
disability.
Defects, yeah,
genetic defect. I want to ask you a question. You said the number one way of killing a werewolf was the fire, burn them at fire.
They said that was one of the few popular ways.
Tell me about the silver. Where did the silver come from?
The silver's kind of legend dating back to the biblical days, like when Judas betrayed Jesus for 13 pieces of silver. That's where that whole deal came from, because people believe that Judas went to hell and for betraying Jesus and stuff, and also there was the idea that, what does it say?
That werewolves so the silver makes them kind of vulnerable.
Well, and back in legend too, when a hunter killed an object that favored a werewolf, and his name, if you take it in Latin, it is silver. So that was one of the ways that it came back from silver
that's
too,
interesting.
because of the name of the hunter that killed this animal that looked like a werewolf.
Oh, okay.
Because his name meant silver.
But the
Argent.
popular reason is because of the whole Judas thing with the 13
Right.
pieces of silver. Same thing with
So is it that the silver is cursed? Like, what gives silver this power?
Well, Judas was, cursed and cast into hell.
Right.
For selling Jesus
Yeah.
out to the Romans. And so therefore it kind of became a way of
Of killing the cursed kind of thing. Because werewolves are a cursed being, kind of. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's that's another one of we come out of the movies with the silver bullets, killing werewolves, but it was because of that hunter, and that's where that lived.
His name was Argent.
And besides the 1500s France and Germany stuff too, like there's actually been some stuff back in the 1970s in England that had evidence of werewolves too. There's this town called Cannock Chase. It's a small village. They've seen werewolves around their cemetery, and there was actually a story there where a 17-year-old boy, because the devil's been given responsibility for a lot of evil stuff, from curses, and all this stuff. But according to the local legend, everything started getting weird in 1975 when a 17-year-old boy in central England took out his Ouija board to test its powers. He said he would trade the devil his soul for the power to turn into a werewolf.
Oh my God.
And shortly after, they said a few months after, his friend received a phone call from the teen, but could only hear weird, odd guttural noises, feral noises from him. And then they said that same young man was found dead soon after he had killed himself using a silver knife.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
he
creepy.
had actually stabbed himself in the heart with a knife.
Wow.
And
here we go back with the Ouija boards again, right?
Yeah, I know. That's what I was going to say. Bring in the Ouija board. Problems arise.
Yeah, I mean, dealing straight with the devil there. And, here in the United States, too, we've had sightings, and we kind of have our own version of werewolf, but it's more Native American, talking about the skinwalkers.
Oh, yeah.
Because you got Skinwalker Ranch out in New Mexico, which is a hotbed
where they've seen a lot of paranormal.
Yeah.
Now, this Skinwalker, is that a tourist attraction, or is that a Indian reservation, or
it's like a Navajo reservation.
Okay.
Deal.
All right.
But it's an actual ranch that a guy owns.
It's near Cayenta, New Mexico, I believe.
Yeah.
And the deal with that is they've seen skinwalkers, and also they've seen UFOs out there as well. And the deal with the skinwalkers is skinwalkers aren't really they're not exactly a werewolf. They're actually a witch that can shapeshift into different animals, wolves being one of the forms, but they've also been known to turn into an owl, a fox, a coyote, and different and other four-legged
So they're
animals.
a shapeshifter.
Yeah, they're just a shapeshifter in general.
How do they get that power? Are they
Now are we going back to the legends, or are we going back to UFOs? Or
No.
Well, this is the Native Americans.
Well, with the Native American deal, the skinwalker, there is a ritual that they do to turn into a skinwalker, and it involves them actually killing someone close to them that they love. And when they kill them and eat the heart, it's like them getting rid of the last shred of their humanity.
Oh, wow.
And that's it's
it's almost
also
a deal with the devil kind of thing.
And that's also the deal with the Wendigo legend too. People, when they resort to cannibalism eventually, the story with the Wendigos, like they resorted to cannibalism, getting rid of their humanity. And
so is there any documented proof of something like that has happened?
What, for a Wendigo?
No, for the skinwalkers.
Well,
there should be some murder investigations on that sort of thing.
Well, the Navajo don't like to talk about it because they believe it's bad luck to even talk about it. But that's
what I was going to ask you. How do the tribes?
So that would be a tribal. Yeah, and that's a separate police organization. So, being ex-law enforcement, I know that you can't go onto an Indian reservation with the FBI can if they're invited in. But
wow!
That is not part of the United States government, and they cannot go investigate on it. That would be a tribal investigation, and could be a cover up there. Then,
well, skinwalkers are like a mainstay in Navajo tradition and legend. It's like, and they tend to keep their culture to themselves, and they think it's dangerous to speak openly to outsiders about that kind of deal.
Especially if you're going to commit a crime.
Right.
Because, they like I said, the skinwalkers are actually known as witches in Navajo culture that used to be humans. And supposedly they want your face. Some traditions suggest they'll steal your very skin. And like I said, they can turn into any kind of animal. But if they take your skin, they can supposedly take your form as well. And they say to never look like a skinwalker in the eyes because that's how they absorb themselves into your body. And they can actually control your every move. And the Navajo...
So they're do they still live with the tribe, or they're kind of banished
They're kind of banished to the outside, because what the Navajo actually have a ceremony that they do for protection, to protect themselves and their land from, skinwalkers and stuff. Mm-hmm. And, so it kind of keeps them at bay. It's like the equivalent of putting, a salt circle around your house to keep ghosts out and stuff like that. And it, like I said, and the Skinwalker Ranch, there's been a ton of sightings, and the words for Skinwalker in the Navajo language is actually pronounced Yi Naldushi, which translates to he who walks on all fours.
Oh, wow.
Now, I'm still a little bit confused. Is this ranch on Navajo property, or is it on U.S. property?
It is. It's on Utah.
It's on Navajo property.
So it's
but
just
it is
the jurisdiction
owned by a white guy. And
wait a minute, he owns property on an Indian reservation? He can't.
He's married into the tribe.
Okay.
He's
okay. All right.
He started seeing skinwalkers and also UFOs there. And he ended up setting up, what are they called? Trail cameras all over his property so that it triggers if there's movement. And he has captured some strange photos that could be interpreted as a skinwalker.
Yeah, and they say skinwalkers can run super far distances too. They're said to be able to run 200 miles at a time, and they like to frequent graveyards because they'll dig up corpses, and somehow they take the corpse's bones and grind it to a dust, and they use it as a poison. It's really, really weird, and they use it to poison their victims. And when they're not transformed into animals, they're described as hollowed out creatures, which is real weird.
It's almost like soulless kind of.
Yeah. And it's also kind of they also have a shared deal with the vampires, saying that they can't enter a home unless invited. Kind of deal as well.
Now, when you say an entered into deal with a vampire. They can't enter a home. That's the vampire's home, or anyone that the vampire is.
The vampire cannot come into
your home,
a person's home unless you invite them in. They can present themselves as a normal human being and knock on your door, and you say, "Oh, hi, come in, have some tea," and then you've invited them in unaware. But
so the skinwalker can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in 1978, a lady named Frances, I can't remember her last name, but her father, her mother, and her brother were driving through the desert, through Navajo land, one night, and they were the only car on the road. It was pitch black. They were driving through the desert, and as they were coming around a bend, she said that her father and all of them, they all saw what looked like this. They said it looked like a black wolf, but it was wearing men's clothing, like a blue and black plaid shirt and blue jeans. And he was like, when he was standing up, he was taller than the cab of the truck. And he kind of lunged at the truck, and they said that they had seen this, and they just kept speeding, and they were checking behind them to make sure that this thing wasn't following them.
Oh, wow.
And what was really weird is when they finally got back home, Frances and her father saw what looked like 3 or 4 Native American men trying to climb the fence in their backyard to get into their house. And they had a Navajo friend, that lived near them. And these 3 or 4 men were actually skinwalkers trying to get into their house. Oh
my God.
So they had their Navajo friend do that protection ceremony around their house to protect them. So I thought that was kind of neat too.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a more modern, what would you call it, experience with the skinwalkers.
The 70s is, that's not, not that.
It's not that long ago.
Yeah, not that long ago.
I was born in the 70s.
So, but yeah, as far as like recent accounts, that was like the most recent stuff I could find was like the Skinwalker Ranch deal, and obviously the, Frances and her family.
Wow, that's some crazy stuff. Sorry.
That's all right.
Bleep that out.
It's a podcast, not a radio show. So
that is crazy, though, man. Well, you want to switch into vampires
let's
now?
Switch into vampires. I'm gonna let you hit the history of that.
I was really surprised because I thought vampires were purely a Slavic thing. Because I knew that what we think of as vampires, like Dracula and that kind of thing, it came from the Slavic area, Eastern Europe. But there's actually cultures like Mesopotamia, the Hebrews, the ancient Greeks, the Romans. They all had tales of some kind of spirit being that was a blood drinker and was something to be afraid of. And
they also had like energy vampires as well, right?
Right, yeah. And
the Roman Empire?
The Roman Empire, yeah.
Wow.
And it had a lot to do with, I think, being afraid of corpses and afraid that corpses could come back to life and suck your life away in order to have life again. And there was a lot of fear surrounding that kind of thing. But what we think of as vampires, like modern day, is really more Slavic. And there's a couple of famous people that the legends of the vampire have been based on. I don't know why, because I'm a weird person. I really like this lady. Her name was Countess Elizabeth Bathroy. And she was a very strange, prolific serial killer, really. She killed, they know, minimum 650 young girls. They think there were also young men, even younger children. But they know definitely 650 people. And she was sourcing them. She killed all of her own slaves and maids. And then she started pulling from the village, inviting people into her castle and for whatever reasons. And what she would do is she believed that torturing them first gave more vitality to their blood. So they were tortured. And then the throats were slit and the bodies were hung above her bath. And she would get in the tub and she would bathe in their blood. But she would also drink the blood of the young girls especially. And she did this because she had this insane fear of growing old.
So how'd that work out for her?
Well, she still died. And, what's surprising is she never picked up any weird blood diseases from this. She ended up dying of old age.
Yeah, but that was before a lot of this.
before a lot of what we have now.
See, a lot of the vampire stuff didn't really get popular until like 1897 when Bram Stoker's Dracula was released.
Yeah, that's a Hollywood
thing.
Yeah.
That book, launched the whole craze for the superstitious versions of vampires.
But vampires go back in Hollywood, back to the black and whites. Still pictures.
Also, everyone knows Vlad the Impaler deal, where Vlad Dracula, he was born in Transylvania, Romania, and he ruled, Wallachia, Romania, off and on from 1456 to 1462. Dracula.
Yeah, in Hungary, Moldavia.
Yeah, and we don't really need to go too far into that because I think everybody's heard that story for the most part.
You know what's interesting is I did see a documentary recently on Vlad the Impaler, and they said the legends are not 100% accurate because, he did impale people on stakes around his castle. He did kill them, but he was ruling an area that was full of thieves and murderers, and he was basically catching these people and killing them and essentially making the area safer. So, I hate revisionist history where we go back and say, well, we were wrong and we make up stuff. But this is really, they've gone back and looked at documentation, and the documents are really showing that he wasn't such a bad guy. Yeah. But like you said, Bram Stoker took the legend of Vlad the Impaler and turned that into the story of Dracula.
And another thing that kind of killed me about the Vlad the Impaler story is, he did a lot of atrocious things because he didn't have a whole lot of military power.
Exactly.
Right. He did a lot of this stuff,
self-policing,
atrocities to create a legend to scare his enemies. Right. Like the drinking of the blood of his enemies from a skull. Uh-huh. He was known to dip his bread in blood of his enemies that betrayed him and whatnot.
Yeah.
So he had to rule by fear because he didn't have the military manpower to fend off
for his kingdom.
Yeah. But staying in Eastern Europe for a minute, they besides Vlad the Impaler, the folklore that we have today of vampires came from Eastern Europe. And they had a fear of corpses, and one of the things they did was if they suspected someone was a vampire or was going to be a vampire after death, they would bury them at a crossroads because they believed that the crossroads was like the cross of Christ and would keep them in the ground. They did do the stakes all the way through the body to stake them into the ground. They would often remove the head and the thigh bones away from the body so that the body could not walk and the head could not direct the body. And they would bury that in a skull and crossbones fashion, with the crossbones being, again, a cross to keep the body from rising from the dead. But all of this came from two diseases that were misunderstood. One being
the
porphyria, which is the one that where you go out in the sun and your skin blisters, and you always hear about children who have to stay inside and can't play with others or can only play at night. That's porphyria, and it involves a lot of other things, but it's a genetic disorder of the immune system.
Well, what's really crazy about it too is some of the symptoms of porphyria can actually be temporarily relieved by ingesting blood. And
that's interesting.
So that's where a part of that vampire myth came from as well.
Yeah.
And
I showed you that photo of there's normal colored urine, yellow, but a person with porphyria, their urine is blood red. And so I think that's another thing. They thought they were also excreting blood from having drank the blood of others.
And on top of porphyria too, because a lot of this was happening during the Middle Ages, during the plague, and the bubonic plague back then caused lesions on the mouth.
Right.
So people would bleed from the mouth, and that was a whole other deal too.
Well, that also came from tuberculosis, because tuberculosis, people were wasting away, and it would wipe out an entire family, but slowly. And you basically lose the ability to retain food and gain any weight. So you become just skin and bones. You're coughing up blood. So people always had blood dripping around their mouths and noses. and it would take out one person and then it would take out another. So they would think that like the whole family was somehow being consumed by a vampire feeding on one at a time.
Yeah. And and they also believe that like albinism, like people like albino people had,
yeah, because they're white skin and
same deal because they couldn't go out into the sun. Their eyes are obviously different pigment,
right?
They have the weird whitish blonde hair. But there is another vampire story that kind of rivals Count Dracula, and that's the Mercy Brown. Mercy Brown, unlike Count Dracula, was a real person. She lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, and was the daughter of George Brown, a farmer. After George lost many family members, including Mercy, in the late 1800s to tuberculosis, his community used Mercy as a scapegoat to explain their deaths. It was common at that time to blame several deaths in the family on one of the undead. The bodies of each dead family member were often exhumed in search for signs of vampirism. When Mercy's body was exhumed and didn't display severe decay, which wasn't surprising because her body was placed in like an above-ground vault during a New England winter, so she was kind of, kept in like almost like a morgue-like state where she was chilled, so she didn't decay like everybody else who'd been buried. The town people accused her of being a vampire and making her family sick from her icy grave. They cut out her heart, they burned it, fed the ashes to her sick brother, and perhaps not surprisingly, he died shortly thereafter too.
Go figure.
Oh my God!
So that's like the American version of a vampire legend right there.
Right.
There's another one that happened more recently. Was Roderick Farrell, called Rod Farrell, and he's an American convicted of murder. There was a clan of teenagers, and it was in Murray, Kentucky. They called themselves the Vampire Clan, and they did little rituals like little cuts on each other and drinking each other's blood. And Rod began thinking of himself as this 500-year-old vampire named Vesago, and it was a character that like he just totally became obsessed with and believed that he was this vampire. And he ended up murdering the mother and father of his girlfriend. And she had just she allegedly mentioned to him that they were kind of getting on her nerves. It's more likely that she was in on the plot and wanted them murdered. So Rod and a friend went in and they bludgeoned them to death. I think there was like a baseball bat and an axe involved. And he's in death row. Well, his sentence was commuted to life without parole because he was a minor, and they had to kind of redo those laws because of the Supreme Court a few years ago. But he'll be in Florida for the rest of his life. And he realizes now that he was not a vampire. I've seen interviews with him.
Kills him and not his son.
He's actually a fiercely intelligent young man, but very misguided, obviously.
Yeah, and modern science has pretty much killed the idea that vampires are real.
Right. Yeah.
But, what's weird is there are people out there who they self-identify themselves as vampires.
Yeah.
Like out there on the internet, they're doing like blood drinking rituals. And
exactly.
Stuff like that. And these are just weirdos, literally cutting themselves or cutting someone else and then drinking.
A cult.
And where this came from, right. the revival of the vampire. Other than it being kind of in B movies through the 60s and 70s, Anne Rice really revived the idea of the vampire with her Vampire Chronicle books, which are great books. I've read them. They're a lot of fun to read, but people have really gotten sucked into thinking that they are these vampires, and it's like role play gone wrong kind of thing. And what's funny about Anne Rice, I've corresponded with her a little bit, and she was born Catholic, and I know, right? And Lestat and the
Interview with the Vampire.
Oh, great book. But
supposedly rebooting that, by the way.
oh, that would be cool without Brad Pitt because he was not very, what's in the box.
Although that was one of the few movies I loved, Kirsten Dunst.
Yes, she was great.
She was a creepy little thing.
Yeah. But Anne Rice has since reconverted to Catholicism, and she doesn't say that her books were a mistake, but she really downplays them now. And she writes books that are more speculative about persons in the Bible. She's written one about Jesus as a child, one about the Apostle Peter, and they're imaginative, they're fictional, but it's, religious writing now. So,
Yeah.
But, it's just like anything else. People are out there looking for their own identity.
yeah.
They're looking for something that is missing in their life, and they grab a hold of something, and like being a vampire, or being a wolf man, or being a serial killer, whatever they grab hold of. It's probably not good for us. It's probably it's good for them for whatever reason. It fulfills their need for whatever
identity.
Yeah. So that's where a lot of that stuff comes from. But
And the need for,
but we can understand back in the 1800s, 1700s, there was so much not known.
Right.
That
a lot of
people,
fear of disease.
Right.
Fear
Well,
of
they couldn't even
corpses.
identify certain diseases. They
So in
didn't know what it
2125, we might be looking at stuff that we think is
Yeah.
normal stuff today, and they're thinking, well, they were just they didn't know what was going on.
Right.
So-
Yeah. There is an interesting theory these days about why people gravitate toward role playing like vampires and forming these vampire clans, and it's this need for human tribalism because we don't live in tribes anymore.
Right.
So it's like it's fulfilling this need to be with other humans.
Well, it's the video games, everything. It's your search for the.
And good God, thank God the Twilight stuff is over, because that was like not going away for like a decade. And what kills me is and all the research I've done on vampires, not once have I ever found anything about a sparkly vampire.
Oh no, they broke every vampire and werewolf rule.
I think that was the hardest part of those movies to digest.
Yeah.
Why would a vampire sparkle?
It was just a love
diamonds
story.
in the sunlight?
But they were. I mean, the popularity of the movies was just.
It was outstanding.
It was a drawing card.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they made money off of those things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was like the preteen version of 50 Shades of Grey.
Right.
Like every teenage girl went and bought that book series.
Yeah, it was a love story. It
Yeah.
was definitely a love story.
Well, so that's kind of that's the origins and history of where we get these legends of vampires and werewolves and what they really are. No proof currently that we know of.
It's kind of weird though that we found more real life accounts on the werewolf side than the vampire
This
side.
is true.
Considering vampires are normally more popular than werewolves.
Oh yeah, I think it's romantic.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Vampires are
romantic,
romantic.
and plus you're looking at you still have a lot of the American Native Americans who are hanging on to their culture, where
Right.
we're not hanging on to a lot of our culture.
Yeah,
Right.
just like we're
we've
moving
had.
forward.
Right.
Yeah.
So and that's one of the reasons that you got your skinwalkers and everything still pretty good.
popular and yeah.
Okay,
Well, that was a
guys.
good
That was,
podcast, guys.
I enjoyed talking to everybody tonight.
So I guess we need to
Yeah.
give a shout out to Warhut since he wanted this podcast so bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
we already knew we were going to do these topics.
Yeah,
anyway.
and we're sorry it took
But,
us so
yeah.
long. We do have a list of topics we're getting to, so we did shoe this one in for Halloween.
And the research is not something that is quick to do.
Exactly.
No, not if you want it to be real.
Yeah.
And we're trying to give you stuff that's real.
Yeah.
So we're hoping everybody you'll be hearing this the night before Halloween. So we're hoping everybody's going to have a great Halloween. Get out there, be safe.
Trick or treat.
Yeah, trick or treat. Have fun. That's the key
Oh
thing.
yeah,
Just everybody
it's
have
the
fun.
best holiday of the year for
Go
fun.
out there to wear your garlic so you don't get bit. Have the silver bullet loaded in the chamber, ready to go.
Ooh, watch it. A lot of these guys conceal carry around here. All right, guys. Good
All
night.
right, thank you
from
guys so much
everybody.
for listening.
All right, good night, guys.
Good night from Mothman Podcast.